Chapter number 6 of the Life of Captain James Cook, the Circumnavigator, by Arthur Kitson. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter number 6, 1768. Preparations for the First Voyage. Till a few years ago, writers on the subject were content to draw their information as to the first voyage of Cook to the South Seas from the so-called history of Dr. Hawkesworth. This gentleman, who posed as a stylist, Boswell calls him a studious imitator of Dr. Johnson, was introduced by Mr. Charles Burney to Lord Sandwich for the express purpose of writing an account of the expedition, and was supplied with all the records in the possession of the Admiralty relating to it. He had access to the journal of Sir Joseph Banks, the notes of Dr. Solander, and others who accompanied Cook, and more than all, he had the opportunity of personal communication with the leaders of the party. Notwithstanding these advantages, he interpolated so much of his own speculations, conclusions and dissertations as to render his voluminous work not only extremely unreliable, but often extremely ridiculous. Travellers to the South Seas record that the accounts of things and places described as seen by Cook are remarkably correct, but that the inferences drawn are wrong. They do not realise that the statements of fact are Cook's, whilst the deductions and ornamentations are Hawkesworth's, and were strongly resented by Cook. Boswell relates that he told Johnson that he had met Captain Cook at dinner at Sir John Pringle's, then President of the Royal Society, and gave him an account of the conversation they had together. Johnson was much pleased with the conscientious accuracy of that celebrated circumnavigator, who set me right as to many of the exaggerated accounts given by Dr. Hawkesworth of his voyages. Cook's opinion on the subject may be seen from his determination to prepare his journals for the press himself in the future. Within the last few years, the Journal of the Endeavour has been published under the able supervision of the late Admiral Sir W. J. L. Wharton, and the Journal of Sir Joseph Banks, which was missing for a long time, has been recovered and published by Sir Joseph Hooker, and these two books may be preferred with safety over all others that have been written on the subject. Memorial to the King. It had been calculated that a transit of Venus would occur in 1769, observations of which would be of great importance to astronomical science, and several of the European nations, notably Russia, were intending to establish points of observation. The Royal Society decided that as England had hitherto taken a lead in astronomy, she should not now fall behind, and appointed a committee to report on the places where it would be desirable to take observations, the methods to be pursued, and the persons best fitted to carry out the work. This committee advised that 2 observers should be sent to Hudson's Bay, 2 to the South Pacific, and if Sweden did not send there, 2 to the North Cape. They also advised that the government should be asked to supply a ship to convey the party to some island to be decided on in the South Seas, and several gentlemen were suggested as observers. Mr. Maskelyne, President of the Society, especially recommending Mr. Dalrymple as a proper person to send to the South Seas, having a particular turn for discoveries, and being an able navigator and well skilled in observation. Mr. Maskelyne estimated the voyage would take about 2 years, and that a sum of 10 shillings and 6pence per day would be a reasonable allowance for expenses, together with a gratuity the amount of which was to be settled hereafter. A memorial on the subject was prepared and forwarded to the King, setting forth that as a transit of Venus over the sun's disk was expected to occur, and that other nations were intending to take observations thereof, in the interests of navigation. It would be desirable that as the British nation had been justly celebrated for its knowledge of astronomy, and an Englishman, Mr. Jeremiah Horrocks, had been the first person who calculated the passage of the planet over the sun in 1639, the government should support the Royal Society in its attempt to take a proper position in the matter, by a grant of money and a ship to take the party to the South Seas. £4,000 was the sum named, and on the 24th of March the President was able to inform the Council that the King had been pleased to order that it should be placed in his hands, clear of fees, for the purpose of defraying the expenses of the expedition. In the end, after paying all accounts, there was a considerable balance left, which the King placed at the disposal of the Society, and a portion of it was expended on the bust of His Majesty by Nollekins, now in its possession. The gentlemen whose names had been suggested as observers were asked to appear before the Council if they were willing to accept the position, and Mr. Dalrymple wrote in reply to say there was only one part of the world where he would go to take observations, that was the South Seas, and he would only go if he had the management of the ship intended for the service. Mr. Maskelyne told the Council he had recommended Mr. Dalrymple to the Admiralty for the command of the ship, the use of which had been granted, but had been informed that such an appointment would be entirely repugnant to the regulations of the Navy. It is said that Sir Edward Hawke, having in his mind the disastrous results of giving Halley the command of a king's ship in 1698, when a serious mutiny occurred, positively refused to sign such a commission, saying that he would rather cut off his right hand than permit anyone but a king's officer to command one of the ships of His Majesty's Navy. Dalrymple, originally a clerk in the East India Company's service, had spent some years trading among the islands of the Malay Archipelago and China, and returned to England and published a couple of pamphlets on the East Indies, and in 1767 a book on the discoveries of the South Pacific Ocean, which brought him to the notice of the Royal Society. He was afterwards for a time hydrographer to the East India Company, and was then appointed the first hydrographer to the Admiralty. He was dismissed from his position for exceeding his powers, and soon afterwards died. He appears to have been a clever man, but of an extremely overbearing disposition, and a very high opinion of himself. In writing to Dr. Hawkesworth on one occasion, he said, "I never write on any subject I do not thoroughly understand." What makes the remark more interesting is that he was quite in the wrong on the subject under discussion. He appears never to have forgiven Cook for having been successful in obtaining the command of the expedition to observe the transit of Venus, and for completely upsetting his pet theory of a large continent in the Southern Ocean. Purchase of the Endeavour. The Navy Board, having been ordered by the Admiralty to propose a proper vessel to convey the observers to the South Seas, first suggested the trial sloop, and then the Rose, but both having been found unsuitable, they were ordered to purchase one. On the 29th of March, the Board wrote to Stephens that they had bought a cat-built bark in burthen 368 tons and of the age of 3 years and 9 months, for conveying such persons as shall be thought proper to the southward. At the same time, instructions were sought as to fitting and arming her for the service, and as to the name under which she was to be registered on the list of the Navy. A cat-built ship is described in the encyclopedias as one with round bluff bows, a wide deep waist, and tapering towards the stern. The name is derived from the Norwegian katti, a ship. The cat-built bark, the now immortal Endeavour, was built by Messrs. Fishburn of Whitby, and owned by Mr. William Milner of that port. Mr. Young says that her original name was the Earl of Pembroke, but Mr. Evan McGregor wrote to Mr. Waddington in 1888 that she was purchased under the name of the Endeavour and was entered as a bark. The warrant entry book from the Board of Trades proves that Mr. Young was right, as the following entries will show. Deptford, March 23rd, 1768. 2 cats called the Valentine and the Earl of Pembroke, to be surveyed and report which is the properest to be purchased. Deptford, March 28, 1768. Ship Earl of Pembroke to be received. Deptford, April 7, 1768. Ship purchased to be sheathed, filled and fitted for a voyage to the southward, to be called the Endeavour Bark. From the records of the Survey Office, List of H.M. Navy 1771 to 1776, it has been ascertained that her price was £2,800, and the cost of fitting her for the voyage was £2,294. The reason she was named officially either the Bark Endeavour or the Endeavour Bark was that there was another Endeavour in the Navy, stationed at that time in the Nore. Kipper says that Pallisser was entrusted with the selection of the ship, and that he called on Cook for assistance in the matter, and the fact that a Whitby-built ship was chosen, of a kind in which Cook had had considerable experience, adds to the probability of his statement. Dalrymple enters a claim, in letters to Dr. Hawkesworth, to having chosen the Endeavour for the voyage, but as she was not ordered to be surveyed, with a view to purchase, till the 23rd of March, when it was well known the Admiralty had refused to allow him the command of the expedition, there is little force in his claim. Copper sheathing. Admiral Wharton assumes that as Cook expresses himself averse from having exploring ships sheathed in copper, owing to the difficulty of making repairs in case of accident far from proper facilities, and from the frequent mention of heeling and boot-topping in the Journal of the Endeavour, it is most probable that she was sheathed in wood. This assumption is correct, for there is no mention of copper sheathing in the surveyor's books, nor at the time of her being repaired at the Endeavour River, nor at Batavia, when it is impossible that any account of her damaged bottom could be given without the mention of copper if any such sheathing had been used. The Naval Chronicle says that the first ship of the Royal Navy to be sheathed with copper was the Alarm frigate in 1758, and it also said that the Dolphin, the ship in which Captain Wallis sailed around the world, was the only coppered ship in the service at the time, and she remained the only one for some years. On the 5th of May, at a council meeting of the Royal Society, Captain John Campbell, R.N., proposed that Cook, who was in attendance, and had been appointed by the Admiralty to the command of the Endeavour, was a fit and proper person to be one of the observers for the Society in the Southern Seas. Cook was called in, and accepted the position in consideration of such a gratuity as the Society should think proper, and an allowance of £120 per year for victualling himself and another observer in every particular. Mr. Green was also called in, and accepted the place as the other observer for the gratuity of 200 guineas for the 2 years the voyage was expected to take, and at the rate of 100 guineas a year afterwards. A list of the instruments to be supplied by the Society was also prepared at the same meeting, and the workmen engaged on them were ordered to show them to Messrs. Green and Cook and give any desired information. A portable observatory, said to have been designed by Smeaton, the builder of the Eddystone Lighthouse, framed of wood and covered with canvas, was also prepared. Mr. Maskelyne, knowing the value of a good watch when observing for longitude, lent the Society one of his own, made by Graham, to be entrusted to Mr. Green, and it was signed for with the other instruments supplied. Chronometers, of course, at that time were in progress of evolution. Several makers were endeavouring to gain the prize which had been offered for a reliable timekeeper. Shortly after, at a second meeting, Cook agreed to accept a gratuity from the Society of 100 guineas for taking the observations, and was paid £120 sustenance money for Mr. Green and himself, with authority to draw on the Society during the voyage for a further amount not exceeding £120. In the Commissions and Warrants books, under the date 26th of May 1768, appears the following entry: Mr. James Cook, 2nd, 1st Lieutenant Endeavour Bark, E.H.C.T.C.S. The initials signified Edward Hawke, Charles Townshend, and Lord Charles Spencer. The second evidently refers to the fact that there was already one James Cook, a lieutenant in the Navy, namely the former master of the Mercury, and the third lieutenant of the Gosport. Pendant hoisted. Having received his orders, Cook proceeded to Deptford and hoisted his pendant on the HMS Endeavour on the 27th of May, and at once started to prepare for sea. A considerable quantity of coal was taken on board to use for drying the ship, as it occupied so much less room than wood. Captain Wallis returned from his voyage around the world about this time, and in consequence of his report, the island of Georgeland, afterwards called by Cook Otaheite and now Tahiti, was fixed upon by the Royal Society as the most desirable place for the observations, and the Admiralty were requested to issue the proper orders, notifying at the same time that Mr. Charles Green and the Lieutenant James Cook had been appointed observers. They also in the same letter write that Joseph Banks, Esquire, Fellow of the Society, a gentleman of large fortune, who is well versed in natural history, being desirous of undertaking the same voyage, the Council very earnestly request their Lordships in that regard, to Mr. Banks' great personal merit and for the advancement of useful knowledge. He also, together with his suite, being 7 persons more, that is, 8 persons in all, together with their baggage, be received on board of the ship under command of Captain Cook. They also requested that the expedition might be landed a month or 6 weeks before the 3rd of June, in order that the instruments might be got into proper working order, and for fear the ship might not be able to reach Georgeland. A table of the limits within which such observations might be taken was enclosed. Full instructions were also given to the 2 observers, and a list of the fixed stars to be observed was drawn up by Mr. Maskelyne. The order to receive Mr. Green and Mr. Banks and party were issued on the 22nd of July, for victuals only. That is, they were to be supplied with the same as the rest of the ship's company whilst on board. The members of the Banks party were Mr. Solander, naturalist, H. Sporing, assistant naturalist, A. Buchan, S. Parkinson, and Junior Reynolds. Artists: James Roberts and Peter Briscoe, white servants; Thomas Richmond and J. Dalton, coloured servants. It was owing to the personal friendship between them that Banks was permitted by Lord Sandwich the First Lord of the Admiralty, to accompany Cook. He had taken up the study of botany when at Eton, and at an early age had been elected F.R.S. He seems quickly to have formed a just estimate of Cook's worth. Indeed, Sir John Barrow says he took a liking to him at the first interview, and a firm friendship sprang up between them which endured to the end. Many instances are to be found of his interest and his support to Cook after their return home, and this friendship speaks volumes for Cook, for though Banks was a most kindly-natured man, he had at times a very overbearing manner. Sir Joseph Hooker, in his introduction, quotes a few interesting letters from Mr. John Ellis, F.R.S., to Linnaeus, the great botanist, in which he says that Mr. Banks, a gentleman of £6,000 a year, has persuaded Dr. Solander to go out with him to the South Seas to collect all the natural curiosities of the place, and after the observations are taken, they are to proceed on further discoveries. He goes on to mention the Library of Natural History and splendid outfit Banks is taking, and says, "In short, Solander assured me this expedition would cost Mr. Banks £10,000. The Endeavour left Deptford on the 21st of July, and calling at Galleon's Reach, took in her guns and gunners' stores. Her armament was originally to have been 6 carriage guns, 4-pounders and 8 swivels, but they were increased to 10 carriage guns and 8 swivels, and at Plymouth 4 more swivels were added for use in the boats. The complement of men was also increased to 85, including 12 marines who were to join at Plymouth, and a 3rd lieutenant had been appointed in July. She had dropped down the river and anchored in the Downs on the 3rd of August, Cook joining her on the 7th, and, discharging his pilot, sailed the next day. He had a very tedious passage down the Channel, and did not arrive at Plymouth till the 14th, when he immediately sent word to Messrs. Banks and Solander, who were still in London, that he was ready for sea, and was only waiting for a fair wind to sail. They therefore started at once, their baggage being already on board, and joined Cook on the 20th of August. Crew well satisfied. Having received his extra guns, marines, 12 barrels of powder, and other stores, Cook mustered his men, paid them 2 months' advance, and explained to them that they were not to expect any additional pay for the intended voyage. He says, "They were well satisfied and expressed great cheerfulness and readiness to prosecute the voyage." The orders under which he sailed were secret, and unfortunately are not to be found. Admiral Wharton says the covering letter is in existence, but the orders which should be on the next page are missing. Cook writes, "I was ordered, therefore, to proceed directly to Otaheite, and after the astronomical observations should be completed, to prosecute the design of making discoveries in the South Pacific Ocean, by proceeding to the south as far as the latitude of 40 degrees. Then, if I found no land, to proceed to the west between 40 and 35 degrees, till I fell in with New Zealand, which I was to explore, and thence return to England by such route as I should think proper." His last letter to the Admiralty before leaving England was written on the day of his arrival at Plymouth, informing them of that fact, and announcing his intention of proceeding to sea with all possible dispatch. End of chapter 6.